Now that you've made new friends, sorry, I'm going to introduce Peter Joseph from Citizens Climate Lobby, and he's going to share about the Carbon Fee and Dividend, among other things.
Okay, can you hear me all?
Yeah.
Really? It doesn't sound very loud. It's okay? All right. I'm Peter Joseph. Good evening, and I'm sitting because I have a herniated lumbar disc. I got an epidural on Friday, and it's kind of sort of working, but it hasn't really done the job. So if I lie down during the performance, know that I haven't passed out. I'm just trying to get more comfortable. So I'm the group leader of the Citizens Climate Lobby group in Marin, live in San Anselmo. I am a retired emergency physician. Spent 35 years doing that over in the East Bay. Trained with Al Gore in 2007 to give the inconvenient truth, the sky really is falling presentation. And quickly realized that, yeah, the sky really is falling, but when people said, well, what can I do? And all I had was the squiggly light bulbs and all the very important personal things that we do, which is incredibly important, but not sufficient. That's when I discovered Citizens Climate Lobby, and I realized that we've moved from symbolic action, such as protests. I got myself arrested at DC, Keystone XL, and all that, which you'll see at the end, to real power. The real power is with money. Money makes the world go round. Follow the money, you know. If you don't understand the money, you don't understand what's going on, and when you do understand the money, you do, and better still, get control of it. So my whole theory is we are not going to dig ourselves out of the hole that we've dug for ourselves on our way to this phenomenal prosperity that we enjoy without getting a hold of the money and getting the economy of the world on our side. Right now, it's not. So this presentation is going to also be personal, and it tells a story of why I'm here, why I'm alive. First, I'd like to start with a reality check. Today, yeah, I'm not sure we still have a democracy functioning here, but we also know where we stand with regard to the climate. It is extremely serious as such. Much more audio. So that's where we stand. It's warmer now than any other time in the last few million years. But before I describe what we need to do about it, I want to describe why I'm here and so passionate about what we're doing. And that is my own personal story. Meet my grandfather, 34-year-old captain in the German army in World War I, a doctor, fought in the trenches. And my father didn't meet his father for the first few years of his life because he was born in 1914. But here he is with his unit, and here he is, my father, at the age of 14. He had his whole career mapped out. He was going to become a great surgeon in Berlin, and all the connections that his father had would be very useful. But something got in the way, and that was the chaos in post-World War I Germany, which led to the rise of, you know what, fascism. Out of chaos comes disarray and fascism. And we are heading now into a very much more chaotic world than ever before, and I fear for what might happen politically. So what did they do? He got a tip-off, because he had patients in the Weimar Republic government that he was about to be arrested, and he took off that afternoon out of Germany, went to Czechoslovakia and then Italy, where he settled with his family. He died a year later of pneumonia, which could have been treated had the first antibiotic been released just 3 weeks earlier. Left my father 26 years old. He was a medical student then, and he had an epiphany. While loving the Alps, he had a thought. He says, this place doesn't feel very comfortable anymore. It's going fascist. Let's get the hell out of here. And the way he describes it, he went down and got a visa to emigrate to the U.S. 1 week before they closed the visas. They got out at the very last minute and came here in March of '39. That's my grandmother and my aunt on your right. She just died 2 months ago at the age of 100. They got out just in the nick of time, because just a few months later they started turning ships around full of desperate refugees. This is the famous case of the St. Louis. Went back to Rotterdam, and people were promptly picked up and carted off to death camps. That's what happens when you don't pay attention. Or if you do, and you just can't manage to get it together to take the steps that you need to take. My ancestors survived. Here they were 60 years later. And here's my father at the ripe old age of 85, a successful physician. And he got away because he heeded the warnings. Only the problem is this time there's no place to run to. You know, there's no place to go. This is it. We live on planet Earth, and we are alone, a little speck in the vastness of the universe, as you well know, and there's no one really going to come to our aid except for ourselves. You know, we've got this technology, so we know what's going on. We know that heat-trapping CO2 levels in the atmosphere are the highest that they've been in at least 3 million years. And they are trapping heat that can't get away, can't get out of the planet, at the rate of far exceeding any previous natural cycles. The squiggly red line are the ice ages and the hot periods, and the CO2 has always been around between 180 and 280 parts per million. And we're now at 413 and heading up faster than ever. And this, of course, this is trapping heat energy, the equivalent of 400,000 atom bombs every day. Just think about that. Spread over the entire surface of the Earth, 94% of it going into the oceans, where it lurks there, ready to do work, namely melt ice and evaporate water. So we have a huge heat imbalance. This has caused the scientists to describe a new geologic era. Imagine that. Humans have created their own geologic era, the Anthropocene, the age of humans. We have departed already from the Holocene, which is the blue line, where we came out of an ice age and percolated a few thousand years and started getting cool until the Industrial Revolution, and then boom, everything started going up as we burned fossil fuels. In fact, we're creating a mass extinction. I'm sure we're the only animal ever to walk the earth that created its own mass extinction. I guess those kinds of creatures don't survive very long. But despite the knowledge of this, happy Groundhog Day, everybody. We have a massive denial campaign in this country. It's funded by the industry, billions of dollars, politicians. They have their own media stations, and they've sold us a bill of goods that there's no problem, which is not the case. We are in deep trouble. And so we're not heeding the warnings. But there's reasons for that. There's a reason for everything. And one of the reasons we're not heeding the warnings is because we've built our entire civilization on fossil fuels, and you don't just pull the plug on that overnight, do you? This is a huge, huge infrastructure. Imagine the sunk costs of the fossil fuel industry. Everything we have almost is produced with fossil fuel energy. It's not so simple. It's not so simple to just say, okay, well, now it's time for wind and solar. It doesn't work that way. It needs a forcing. It needs to be pushed. And while we're at it, you see everything is going up. All the fossil fuels that are on the bottom, as well as the more renewables, and that little tiny slice of green up there, that little piece of meringue at the top of the pie, that's renewables. So you think renewables are going to take over the energy system anytime soon, that is going to require a big miracle. It is possible, but it's going to need help. It's going to need a lot of help. First of all, there's trillions of dollars worth of products still in the ground, and the fossil fuel industry ain't going to walk away from that without a fight. $23 trillion. And what are they doing to convert from fossil fuel to renewables? Not a whole lot. The red line is what they spend on renewables, research and development. Everything else is exploration and production. So, here's a graph that shows, since the lower left is 1850, that's when the Industrial Revolution got started in real earnest, really chugging along, and fossil fuel emissions, it's tons of CO2 on the vertical, just going up exponentially. Now, the scientists tell us that in order to have even a 50-50 chance of not exceeding the 2 degrees C mark that we're trying to aim for, that curve needs to come to a screeching halt and turn around. It's like a runaway freight train. What can possibly do that? What can possibly turn a runaway freight train, bring it to a stop, and then turn it around? Is it people? The people want it. You're here. There's a huge movement. This was New York City in 2014. I'm right up there at 96th Street. There were 410,000 people on the street. But guess what? They had no one single demand. It was, do something. Do something about climate change. Yeah, well, the politicians know that. They know they want that people want them to do something. And the question is what? The kids are getting active. Here's Greta. Thank God for Greta. And they're very articulate.
This is all wrong. I shouldn't be up here. I should be back in school on the other side of the ocean. Yet you all come to us young people for hope. How dare you? You have stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words, and yet I'm one of the lucky ones. People are suffering, people are dying, entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. How dare you? You are failing us. But the young people are starting to understand your betrayal. The eyes of all future generations are upon you. And if you choose to fail us, I say we will never forgive you.
I have 3 kids. I have 3 grandkids. And when I hear her, I feel my own share of guilt. I've been part of the problem. I've burned a lot of fuel. And it also motivates me to just work even harder for solutions that are effective and targeted, that are going to work, that are the close to the magic bullet solutions as possible. And that's what we're going to talk about. So what can possibly break our addiction? Let's face it. We are a modern civilization, and we are addicted to fossil fuels. There's no question about that, right? What can possibly break the addiction? I have a hint. what's in the slingshot? Is this a fair fight? You've got a Goliath on one hand, a scrawny little guy on the other, with a little thing in his slingshot. What do you suppose it could be?
It's important. I think it's extremely important that we establish a carbon tax. This is a carbon tax that would apply to all carbon-producing entities, so power plants, to anything that, both to electricity generation from hydrocarbons as well as production of gasoline or consumption of gasoline. And I think that will actually increase the price of electricity to the degree that the electricity is coming from hydrocarbons, and it will increase the price of gasoline. But I think this is important because right now we're consuming this extremely valuable common good, which is the carbon capacity of the oceans and atmosphere, and we're not paying anything for that consumption. This is like having the garbage pile in your street and nobody's paying for it, and the garbage gets higher and higher. Eventually, terrible things happen. So it's just very important to put a price on, if somebody's dumping chemicals in the atmosphere, they need to pay for it.
It's cellulose. We actually did the calculations to say, like, what would it take to transition the whole world to sustainable energy? What kind of throughput would you actually need? And you need 100 gigafactories. So
100 of these.
100 of these, yes.
That would make the United States.
No, the whole world.
The whole world.
The whole world. All energy.
That's it?
Yeah.
That sounds.
It's manageable.
That sounds manageable.
Yeah. The gigafactory, when it's complete, will have the largest footprint of any building in the world. Counting multiple levels, it could be as much as 15 million square feet. So Tesla can't build 100 gigafactories. The thing that's really going to make a difference is if companies that are much bigger than Tesla do the same thing. If the big industrial companies in China and the US and Europe, the big car companies, if they also do this, then collectively we can accelerate the transition to sustainable energy. And if government sets the rules to favor sustainable energy, we can get there really quickly. But it's really fundamental. Unless there's a price put on carbon,
We're never going to be able to make the transition that we need to in time, correct?
yeah. The only way to do that is basically with a carbon tax.
Okay, now walk me through a carbon tax, which is what you're saying is the silver bullet for climate change.
Well, a carbon tax would be basically a tax on any kind of activity that put carbon into the atmosphere. So when you tax something and raise the price, people are going to tend to consume less of it. In fact, that's sort of lesson number one of economics.
So you're teaching economics at Harvard, and you literally wrote the book on contemporary economics, right?
Well, I'm teaching the course for many years, I might as well write the textbook to go with it.
So just to be clear, you've worked with a lot of Republican heavyweights, John McCain, Mitt Romney, and you worked for George Bush when he became president.
I was chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors.
So how come we don't have a carbon tax already?
Politicians don't always do it, professors want them to do. The basic idea is that we want to tax bad activities that have negative side effects on other people in society. So we raise the price of cigarettes by putting a tax on cigarettes, people are going to consume fewer cigarettes. Climate change involves a variety of negative side effects and costs. A carbon tax forces people to take account of those costs. I think trying to appeal to people's social responsibility is really very, very hard because people have complicated lives, they have lots of things to worry about. They don't want to have to think about climate change every time they do every decision. They can't. And every time you turn on your car, you're supposed to think, uh-oh, what am I doing to the climate? What carbon tax does is it nudges them in the direction of doing the right thing.
So let me get this straight. You're a Republican who wants more taxes.
Well, one of the important things to keep in mind is that if you have a carbon tax, you can turn around and cut other taxes in response. For example, payroll taxes. This is a tax shift rather than a tax increase.
So is it possible to ever pass a carbon tax now, given the current political situation? I mean, half the people in office still don't believe in climate change.
During the campaign, President Obama didn't want to say the word carbon tax because it polled terribly. If we want to change the president's view of carbon taxes, we need to change the public's view of carbon taxes. Think of gay marriage. Remember Barack Obama ran against gay marriage.
I am not a supporter of gay marriage.
When did he switch? When the polls started switching.
I think same-sex couples should be able to get married.
Politicians, whether we call them our elected leaders, are really our elected followers. They do what the people want them to do. We need to preach to the American people. Once the American people are convinced, the politicians will fall in line very quickly.
In fact, public opinion is shifting. This is studies from Yale. If you look at every one of these categories, starting in the upper right, I think it's happening, up 11%. I'm worried about it, 16. Human cost, up 15. It will harm Americans, up 12. So, I mean, we're moving in the right direction for obvious reasons, because nature is cooperating by slamming us with all kinds of climate events. Here in Sonoma County, we're about, on the average, this again is from Yale. I won't go over every one of these categories, but Sonoma County is about average, and California is above average for the country, of course. But look at down here, this light blue. Global warming will harm me personally. Only 46% of people somehow think they're going to get away with not being harmed personally. I wonder if that's still true with the fires that have been here and everything. But that's a key belief, because if you think you're not going to be impacted, you're much less likely to want to do something about it. And the opposite is true. If you feel personally threatened, that's when people wake up. Now, here in this California 2nd Congressional District, represented by Jared Huffman, if you look at the very bottom, the long blue thing here, 71% of the population here supports a revenue-neutral carbon tax on a federal level. And we're very happy about that, and very hopeful that Representative Huffman will get that message and take it to heart. So, meet Citizens Climate Lobby. Who here is a member of Citizens Climate Lobby? May I see a show of hands? 21 people. Thank you for coming. And we invite you all to join us. This is an upstart, young, grassroots, 11-year-old organization. Started with 3 people. And the way we work is at the federal level with Congress. Every congressional member knows their Citizens Climate Lobby liaison. Believe me, they all know who we are. And we work showing respect, gratitude for service. We are polite. We get in the front door. We wear business attire when we do. And we are pushing for a, as you see, nonpartisan, let me repeat, nonpartisan, sorry, went too far, revenue neutral, that's fully refunded, revenue neutral, the government doesn't keep the money, carbon fee, that's a price put on carbon, paid back as a dividend to all Americans, accompanied by a border carbon duty. That's very, very important. We'll talk a little bit about that in just a moment. Fully refunded, revenue neutral, carbon fee, dividend, and border carbon duty. And why do we like this? Not too far. It has a lot of really great features. It appeals to conservatives. Why? Because it doesn't grow the size of government. It's progressive. Why? Because when the money is all given back to people, lower income households do just fine. Unlike other taxes, it is not regressive, it is progressive. It is highly specific. It's not do something about climate change. It's put on a carbon fee at the source of these fuels as they enter the economy in order to send market signals that will engage producers and manufacturers, all markets, all over the world, to start pushing this transition away from artificially cheap fossil fuels. As long as artificially cheap fossil fuels are available, they're going to get used. You can count on it. It's rapid. It can be instituted very quickly with the passage of a law, go into effect, and you're off and running. It's fair. It's fair to everybody. No one is singled out. No one industry is singled out. For example, the Clean Power Plant is about electricity generation. And the electricity generator said, hey, what about the automotive industry and the cars and all that? So they can claim it's unfair, they're being unfairly singled out. This is economy-wide, from the very, very top. It's engaging because it can be understood. It can be understood. Even I can understand it, and I don't like economics, but it doesn't take that much study to figure out, oh yeah, I get it, I understand this, and I'm going to explain it shortly. It's international with the border carbon duty. You don't need the United Nations or the IPCC or the World Trade Organization telling countries what to do. In fact, there's no body on the face of the planet that has that capacity, as far as I know. But it's just simply using the normal gears of trade. And by the way, since we're the biggest trading partner in the world, we might as well use that throwaway to our advantage. As I said, it's understandable. Unlike cap and trade, I mean, Tor tried to explain that to you earlier, and it was like, does anybody really understand how cap and trade work? I certainly don't. It's very complicated. It supports markets. It's not the government doing everything. It's markets doing what they need to do. It's markets doing what they're best at doing, which is acting rationally. Because right now the market is not rational because of these externalized enormous factors that don't get reflected in the price of the fuel. And lastly, it's beneficial to national security. Ask any military people, and they'll tell you how very freaked out they are over climate change as a threat multiplier and the threat that it poses to our military bases all over the place. I'm going to skip that. So let's get into some detail, and then we'll be done. Powerful solution. How does it work? First of all, this crisis is huge. The scale of this crisis cannot be overstated. And in order to achieve a global solution, we need to shift the entire world's economy to a low-carbon trajectory. One country doing it, you know, if you're Denmark, and you've got all this wind power, and you're all fossil fuels, it's like, good for you, but what have you really done? All that means is they're not buying oil from someone, so the price goes down instantaneously on the market, and someone else will buy it. So unless the whole world is doing this, it's not going to work. A hodgepodge, which is what we now have, of these carbon pricing mechanisms is just meaningless. We must build political support at the national level. And that's what we're trying to do. And that will lead to major investments to replace fossil fuels from the private sector. There's much more money available in the private sector than the government. And they get to make those decisions themselves rather than Congress, which is, you know, just so functional these days. You have innovation that will pop up that will definitely lower costs. Fairness and equity, in other words, what I said, it's not regressive, it's progressive. That will build political support. The political support for this carbon tax is absolutely crucial. Because, can you imagine, Congress is about to pass this thing, the amount of propaganda and vicious attacks, truthful or not, that will be saturating the airwaves and, you know, everyone's mailbox. It's going to be, the sky is falling and the world is coming to an end. You know, this thing has to be clear and understandable, and people have to understand what's in it for them to be behind it. So we have superstar economists who have signed on to a letter which is available at the front. 3,554 professional economists. Have you ever heard of that many economists agreeing on anything? It's unheard of. Their consensus is as strong as the scientists' consensus on what we need to do. I'll let you read Yellen's statement. So basically we're talking about incentives, powerful incentives to everyone, every consumer, every producer, every entrepreneur, every small business, to get involved, because when you tax these fuels at the very top where they enter the economy, that means everybody gets the signal. Everybody gets the signal. No one is immune from getting the price signal and then acting accordingly. It also preserves your freedom to not act accordingly if you don't want to, which is a very important quality in this country. People don't like being told what to do by the government, let's face it. In practice, carbon taxes have been in place. Sweden has a very strong carbon tax. Their economy is doing just fine, and their carbon emissions are way below what ours are. So, turns out we have a bill. Miracle of miracles. Late last year and then early this year it was reintroduced. We have the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act in the House of Representatives, and it currently has 79 co-sponsors, including one lonely Republican. And it's probably the best we've got right now, although it has spawned 5 or 6 other carbon pricing bills. So, in other words, carbon pricing is now popular. People are thinking about it, and I think the politicians are sort of jockeying for a position to take probably after the elections and to see where they go. So, how does it work exactly? Here's a schematic. Start in the lower left. You've got the fuels. Truckload of coal, some natural gas, boatload of oil pulls into the harbor, and it gets assessed. $15 per ton, going up $10 per year. That's a pretty steep ramp-up rate. Other bills have them going up like with the rate of inflation, which is very little. So we go up quickly and aggressively. It's the aggressive ramp-up rate that sends the price signal to markets. So the energy companies pay their fee to the Treasury. The Treasury cuts you in a check. In fact, they start cutting checks before the tax even goes into place, so that nobody's caught short at the end of the month. Checks go to the people, and then the people have choices. They can keep doing whatever they're doing, because at the beginning there won't be much price differences to notice, really. But as the years go by, higher carbon intensity stuff, whatever that stuff may be, if it's a tube of toothpaste, a loaf of bread, or a gallon of gas, or an airplane ticket, is going to start going up. And people watch prices. So if you have a choice between a $6 loaf of bread that's baked in an oven powered by natural gas and a $5 loaf of bread that's baked in an oven powered by a solar farm, you're probably going to go for the $5 bread. Why not? And you're also going to get a check in the mail, and you can keep the spread between what you're spending and what you're getting and make a little money. In fact, a lot of people might make a considerable amount of money for them, especially on the lower incomes. So the result is growing demand for fossil-free products, and that drives innovation. What could be more capitalist than that? You know? So, look, we don't have time to throw out the current financial system that exists on this planet. We'll be lucky to stay glued together as an organized civilization long enough to work out the kinks and the bugs in the iniquities in our financial system. I just want to stay alive as a civilization. And this is the way to do it with the least bumps in the road. Now, on demand, a lot of people worry about income inequality and equity. So do we. It's a very important feature, and this is not a bug. It's a feature of the bill, that the lower income people do just fine. And if they're smart, you can actually make money. Now, the border carbon adjustment, very briefly. The way I see it, the world economy is an intermeshing set of gears, lots and lots and lots of them, with rules and taxes, and different countries have different rules, etc., etc. But basically, it's like a machine, right? And that little thing in the slingshot that David was wielding against Goliath, I think, is the carbon tax. If you throw into this machine that tweak, and it is just a tweak, if you throw that tweak in, it gets amplified throughout the system. It's like, you know, when the Fed announces that they're going to raise or lower interest rates by 25 basis points, which is a very tiny little change. It's front page news the next morning, right? Because it has macroeconomic effects. That's how I see this tweak in the tax code. A little bit goes a long way because it's amplified. The good folks at Columbia, our allies, have modeled this bill, and it shows very significant emission reductions over the first couple of decades, and even more as you go forward. For comparison, for example, the Clean Power Plan would have kept emissions right around there. It's about a 4% only reduction from the Clean Power Plan. And the Clean Power Plan isn't even alive anymore because it's held up in the courts, and obviously the Trump administration is not about to enforce it. So it's like there's nothing out there doing this, as far as I know. And here we have a real chance at a bill that can be acceptable to social conservatives, Republicans and Democrats alike. So back to this curve. What else? Can anyone think of anything else that can take that runaway train that's heading up on that red slope, practically vertically, and slam on the brakes and turn it around in time to save us from outright doom? And I would add that all of the science that's coming through these days, you don't even want to read it before you go to bed because it's getting more and more alarming. I don't know of any good news that I've read with regard to the science in terms of the positive feedback loops and how they've underestimated the impacts of this amount of temperature rise, etc. So that the sense of urgency is like, this is code 3 lights and sirens like I used to thrive on when I was in New York. I'd get real excited. It's a code 3 coming in with lights and sirens. Great. This is a code 3 situation. So that's the pitch. We have to harness the immense market power of money on a global scale. And the best, most efficacious way to do that, and the least costly, it's the least costly solution, by the way, much less costly than regulations, is with this nonpartisan, revenue-neutral, fully refunded carbon fee, dividend, and border carbon duty. And I'll just say one more thing. The Affordable Care Act passed by the skin of its teeth. And you see where it is now. They've been trying to demolish it ever since it passed. Nixon's climate legislations, the EPA, the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, all had tremendous bipartisan support and have stood the test of time. They've been there for 40, 50 years. So when you think about what can we do, think about something that can be done that's not just, oh, the Democrats are going to cram it down the Republicans' throats, or the Republicans are going to cram it down the Democrats' throats. I've heard that before in Washington when I go to the lobby. It doesn't work that way if you want something to last long. It has to be nonpartisan, bipartisan. Everybody has to give up a little bit. Everybody has to be a little unhappy. What the conservatives, the Republicans, the climate deniers have to give up is climate denial. Once and for all. Give it up. It's not politically a viable strategy. And in return, you'll get a market-based plan that does what you like. You like markets. You like free markets, right? And for progressives, what they have to give up is getting hold of all that money, all that gold, $1 trillion, with which they can do wonderful, wonderful things. I was the liaison to one of the senators from California who was nose to nose with me, and she said, "I hate revenue neutrality, Peter." I said, well, why? Because I want to do good things with the money. I said, well, but would you vote for a bill that was revenue neutral? And she said, I sure would. So, hell yes. In other words, it's acceptable. And that's the way we're going to get to yes. Everyone a little unhappy, and then everybody very happy that we're finally attacking this problem. Because, back when my grandfather fled Nazi Germany in 1933, towing his 20-year-old son, my father, and his little daughter out of there, they thought they'd come back. My father says, Hitler, everybody knew he was a joke. The army will take care of him. He's not going to last. Well, you know the end of that story. And we fought then because our way of life was at stake. And we won. At great loss. Blood, sweat, and tears. Well, now, we're called upon to do it again. Only there's no place to go. Our civilization, truly, is at risk. And we need to get our act together and act decisively. And let's not fight this with our hands tied behind our backs. That's me. With my hands tied behind my back in front of the White House, protesting the Keystone XL pipeline, which won for a while. Obama redlined it, only to have Trump greenline it. And I felt good about that. I was sort of putting my body where my mouth was, But then I realized, it's symbolic. Symbolism is very important, but it is just symbolic. Money is the real stuff. That's what makes it work. That's why we're able to draw 1,500 people to stand on the steps of the Capitol. This is last June. So, when I say it, carbon price is the price of civilization. It's the price of civilization. Are we going to do it or not? And what it's worth? It's worth everything. I'm sure it's worth everything to you, all of you. So, thank you very much. Happy to answer questions.
All right. Well, normally I ask questions first, but anybody got any questions?
Please.
We'll just put it online.
Thanks, Peter. So what I'm wondering is, if this were implemented, let's say fully in 5 years, and at a level that was impacting the markets, would it be compatible with the paradigm of economic growth?
I think you'd see tremendous economic growth. I mean, you think about the new inventions and the change out of infrastructure from the dirty infrastructure that we have now. God only knows how many trillions of dollars have been sunk into the current infrastructure. And we need to develop new processes, new ways of doing things, new vehicles, new tools, new everything. So I think I understand the basis for your question, and obviously the answer to is infinite economic growth even possible? The answer to that is no, not on a finite planet. We understand that. But in the immediate sense, we're not going to have any economic growth if we allow climate change to go the way it's going. We're going to get walloped so badly. As I say, we'll be lucky to keep it together as a civilization. We do have an economist in the audience, which maybe Jonathan Marshall would like to take a swipe at that question. Would you, Jonathan?
If that's okay. Hi, I'm a colleague of Peter's with the Marin Citizens Climate Lobby. One example we have, which Peter alluded to with one of his slides, is Sweden, which has a carbon tax of about $130 per ton of CO2, which it began implementing back in 1991. And since then, its GDP has grown about 80%. In fact, Sweden's economy is so healthy that conservatives used to bash Sweden as a typical socialist Scandinavian country. Now they're heralding it as a great example of what a free market country can do, because it's has such a miracle, a strong economy. So call it what you will, but they emit now a quarter as much CO2 per dollar of GDP as the United States. So, and they're one of the richest countries in the world. And I would also add, just about every economic forecast done of carbon taxes at these levels shows an imperceptible impact on GDP. So, yes, I think most economists, including the 3,554 who signed that statement, are very confident that we can, at least this far, have our cake and eat it too. As Peter said, maybe not forever, but we can have a very vibrant economy.
I have a question about, so I asked, we were chatting beforehand about, because this is a dividend fee neutral kind of thing where all the money goes back to citizens. So how do we fund infrastructure projects where government has a role in that kind of thing to sort of help speed that along?
That's a very good question, Tor. The question is, of course, the use of the money. The reason we prefer to call it revenue neutral and fully refunded, I mean, you can be revenue neutral and not have all the money go back to people. And between you and me, probably when the sausage is made, some of the money will be used for other things. But just on a theoretical basis, number one, there's plenty of money in the budget. There's plenty of money for new wars and new warships and new ballistic missiles and the Space Force and etc. Somehow we're able to find money when we want to find it. A very clear reason not to divert the money to other projects is this. Do you want Rick Perry deciding what projects get funded? I don't. Do you want some invisible, unelected board of people deciding which community gets a seawall or solar panels and which don't? I mean, one of the reasons the Carbon Washington initiative failed twice now, it was revenue neutral, but the money was all going to go to really good things, popular and worthy projects. But unfortunately, that would only touch a small slice of the population. And every other voter, seeing their gas prices going up, would simply ask the question, what's in it for me? I'm not going to see any of the goodies here, so no, I'm not voting for it. So, as you know, one of our advisory board members, George Schultz, the venerable now 99-year-old former Secretary of State and Treasury, who I recruited to the advisory board, and I go visit once a year down at Stanford. And I keep asking him the same question just to make sure he still has the same answer. I said, Secretary, you still believe in 100% revenue return to individuals, right? And he kind of hoists himself up and he pounds his fist on the table. He says, absolutely, for political reasons, it's accountable. It's accountable. Now, can you imagine, everyone, the prices are going up, there's trillions of dollars coming into the government, some of it's going here, some of it's going there, some of it you have no idea where it's going, and you've got Rush Limbaugh, sorry Rush Limbaugh saying, well, they're stealing your money. That erodes the political durability of this tax, this program. And if your industry, and you see this is happening, and you know, your board gets together and says, well look, to be competitive, we need to spend $1 billion on new factories and all that stuff. But you know, how do we know this tax is going to last? The next administration isn't going to come and kneecap it. It's, you know, unless it's as popular and as solid as the Alaska Permanent Fund, Social Security, and Medicare, you've got no guarantee that it's going to last. And if you don't have that guarantee, I don't think the industry leaders who are being called upon, after all, to make huge investment decisions in order to stay competitive are going to be able to sell it to their boards. Or should they maybe just wait a couple of years and ride it out, see maybe whether it'll collapse, like it did in Australia, for example, with change of regime. So it must be popular. It's hard to stress how, you don't think of legislation as being primarily engineered to be popular, but think about what happens if it's not. It has to be popular. It has to be something where people say, you're not taking that away.
Can I just add a couple quick things to that? Because I think you've asked a really important question. It's one of the biggest, I think, issues that arises, is what to do with the money, which is also not surprising given members of Congress, part of what they do is spend tax money, so they have an interest in that. The first, maybe most important thing is there's a very widespread misconception that the way the system affects the climate and greenhouse gas emissions is through how you spend the money. And that's actually just backwards. It's by creating this price signal to leverage every economic decision by every individual, corporation, and enterprise in this country. They are collectively vastly bigger than the government. So most of the coal-fired plants and oil refineries and cars and everything else that Peter showed in his slides, those were bought and paid for with private money. By shifting the incentives to get all that money to shift towards clean energy and cleaner vehicles and so forth, you have leveraged trillions and trillions of dollars of capital far beyond anything that the government will raise. So that's point number one. And point number two, I think, is really important for progressives to think about very seriously. And that is, when we raise the cost of energy, which will happen, low-income folks who are trying to heat their homes and get to their job in an old car, which may not be, a Tesla or something, they're going to be paying more. And if you just steer all the money into nice green projects, they're going to get shafted and pissed. You're going to lose political support from the very people you think ought to be supporting this. And the beautiful thing about this plan, it is probably the most economically progressive program sneaked in, as it really is, a climate plan, but along the way it's a mini guaranteed annual income of the sort that Andrew Yang has been talking about. It would provide several $1,000s a year for the average family of four. That is the most, as I say, the most progressive economic plan ever, if we get this, ever achieved in the United States. So it's good on both. The climate impact is unparalleled, and the progressivity is as well.
When I heard what you're laying out there, I feel nauseous, honestly. To me, it sounds like you're just going to let the fossil fuel industry pay $15 a ton to destroy our planet, and then you're going to give the money to us like the money's going to do any good at that point. And the number $15 a ton, from what I've heard, $100 a ton would be more along the level of what we need at this point and of what it's worth, so to speak. I'm wondering if you have any response to that.
Sure. And I agree with you. 15 is not very much. That was the whole point. The point is to get it in, sneak it in, and not sneak it in, but start at a level that does not create a price shock where people recoil in horror that, oh my God, you're going to raise prices that suddenly by that much, that'll never fly. Start low, but go quick. Low and fast. And, it's not about the oil companies. They're going to pass their costs on, for the most part, If you charge Exxon this much for a barrel of oil, they'll pass it on to, the gasoline company. And eventually you'll pay most of it. But what will that do? That will change your behavior and the automobile manufacturer's behavior. The brainiacs in Detroit are going to get that they can't be, building gas guzzlers for very long and expect people to keep buying them. So that's the behavior change that we're looking at. The estimates of what a proper carbon tax is are very tremendously, I've heard, in the teens to in the thousands of dollars. You know, it all depends on how you add up the damages. But you have to do something. You have to do something. And the more time we waste debating, well, what's the exact right number? We're losing years. The point is to get it going. Get it going. And then we'll take it from there. And get it going in a way that's not going to get overthrown.
Hang on a second. Let's shift gears.
Yeah, but 10 years is too late.
So, I want to shift gears here for a second. And we have a lot of high school students here. How many of you are going to vote for the first time this year? Okay. So, and for the primaries, maybe? To qualify? A couple? No? So, so looking ahead to this initiative makes progress, and we have some candidates, and we're trying to get the right candidates, win the Senate. What do we all need to even make this a reality? Because in Washington, yes, there's a bill sitting there, but there's a whole election process laying ahead of us in 2020, and I don't know if you guys have any questions to add to that, but what do you see the path forward on that? Making Congress more amenable to actually passing something here.
That's a very good point, and I'd like to turn that over to some of the other Citizens Climate Lobby members who've been with me on the Hill. Dave, for example, or anyone else? What's your viewpoint?
I think that having been, I can talk about it. Having been on the Hill, yeah, it's a tough sell. And we've been at this for 10 years, and we've worked really hard, and we're making progress. But we've got to sell this across the constituency. So more important than the partisan issue, I think Peter makes a really good point that we have to make this something that people want, not people in a political party want, but people want. People want to save their planet. People want to get a check every month, And that check, by the way, one thing I would like to point out is about that $100 a ton price. Ours will be that within 10 years, and in 20 years it will be $200 a ton. So it's going to get big. It's not going to be piddling. It starts out piddling, but it is going to get big. So I think you want to elect people who will listen to you and are not dogmatic. I think that's really important. Yeah. Anyone else?
Excellent. So I guess one other, I'm impressed with, for example, the Sunrise movement. That's a lot of youth that's getting a lot of, making a lot of waves. And they have pitched the Green New Deal. So, have you heard of that? All right. So, how does the Green New Deal and the Carbon Fee and Dividend mesh, if at all?
I've got the answer.
Try to get this on tape.
At the climate strike, September 20th, Alexa Forster over at the JC got a bunch of students together and organized a sunrise climate strike sort of thing. They all ended up coming to the Santa Rosa Plaza, and we had a table there. And Alexa told us the big deal is you've got to have something that people can do right is meaningful. And we said, okay, Alexa, we got it. And what we had was little forms people could fill out. There were personal notes to their congressman saying whatever they want. My grandchildren, I need to save them. I'm scared of climate change. I want something to happen. Whatever. We got 100 people that afternoon to write letters to their congressman.
And we have those forms with us now.
What?
We have those forms with us.
Yes, we have the forms there. And the point is that these people were Sunrise folks who were totally in love with the Green New Deal. The Green New Deal is great, but if you look at the Green New Deal, it is a roadmap. It is not a plan. It's a roadmap 2 or 3 years hence. Tomorrow, we can enact a carbon tax. We can deal with 30 to 40% of the problem in one fell swoop. And then, with the Green New Deal, we say, okay, what is not price sensitive in our economy? where we need to do something beyond a price signal. So they're perfectly complementary, and most people who I've talked to this have never put up an argument.
I'd like to suggest too that those who want more information, and there's a ton of it, should go to the citizensclimatelobby.org website. Consider clicking the button support. Whether you want to participate or not, those numbers are important because the numbers of the organization have been doubling every year for the past 5 years. We started with like 3 people, and now it's over 220,000 or so. And those numbers are impressive when you walk into a congressional office and they're sizing us up, like compared to the Greenpeace and Sierra Club. But our rate of growth has been spectacular. So please join. There's no obligation, no dues. And that gives you access to a treasure trove of deep information should you wish to avail yourself of it.
I have a question regarding this. I think it's a really interesting idea. I'm curious about what the proposed method of enforcement of the collection of the taxes.
Okay, that's relatively easy. There are already taxes levied on all fossil fuel producers right there at the source. So the government knows how to do that. It's the Treasury Department, I think. And this would actually vastly simplify the process of collecting excise taxes because there's only so many places where these fuels enter the economy. They're measured by the hundreds instead of by the thousands. To regulate end product combustion in every factory and every burner here and there is a nightmare. And it's a regulatory nightmare for the businesses as well. But to do so way up at the top is much easier. And then businesses get to do it the way they want to, knowing that they're going to have to pay the price. And if they want to stay in business, they're going to have to adjust. Yes.
Any students have a question? You want to go home? No, not yet. Can't yet.
I just want to add something about the rise in the fee every year and the mechanisms that are in place. There's a very, I don't know if we emphasize, there's a very ambitious requirement for emissions reductions each year. And there's a mechanism after 5 years, if those emissions reduction requirements aren't being met, then the increase in the fee is raised by 50%, by $15 a year instead of $10 a year. That's one mechanism. The other mechanism is that it actually empowers the Environmental Protection Agency much more than they are currently empowered to regulate greenhouse gases for their greenhouse gas effect. After 10 years, then all holds are barred, and the EPA is mandated to use every mechanism they can to meet those very aggressive requirements.
If they haven't been met.
If they haven't been met, no.
They still exist.
Okay. Hang on one second. Did you guys have a question? One of you? No? Okay. You said you did. Okay, Jim.
On your on one of the charts, I think it was a 37% reduction by 2040 or something. What the modeling that's what it produced? Does that sound about right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's not enough because we know we've got to get down to zero at some point. What do you think is required to do that? You know, to turn it around like the chart needs. It has to drop radically, and the 37% isn't enough.
That's in the first 10 years, and so it's well before 2040. And the carbon tax keeps going up, so the projection is by 2050.
By 2050.
We have a very good chance, not a guarantee, of hitting the 1.5 degrees C target that
What's the reduction?
about 80%.
An 80% reduction.
Right.
By 2050.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, we're getting into numbers. But as a takeaway, let's think about some takeaways for what you and me and us can do. You mentioned joining CCL to get more involved. Locally, yeah, I think the main message for myself is that is to pay attention to, closer to the candidates, because I think this is an election year. This is where we change some things. No,
Well, the other
don't
thing
care.
is our byline is create the political will for a livable world. We have to talk to our congressmen. We have to get in the habit of once a month calling up and saying, I notice you haven't done anything. I care about this. My grandkids care about it. They need, when we go to an office and we talk, we ask them, what is the thing that most motivates you as a congressperson? This is left, right, Republican, Democrat. Every one of them says, I listen to my constituents. And if we don't talk, climate change is going to slide right down to the bottom of the list. We have, it's imperative, we have to keep them up to speed. Hey, work on this.
That's a very good point, and I want to sort of connect to that because my daughters went to Annalee High School, and you guys are students there now. And Annalee High School, our West Sonoma County High School District, passed a climate resolution 2 years ago, but no one knows about it. That says it's an important issue, and we're going to start meeting and talking and doing things. So next week, the film Hike the Divide will be showing at Annalee High School as a catalyst to start the conversation. And in that world, the school world, you have administrators that make decisions for how your school operates and what you do in the classroom. And you have a voice in that. So think about that. Come to the film. Everybody else is welcome to come join the film too next week. But that's a small little
microcosm of, time's up.
Yeah. So anyway, that's just a plug for what we can do locally.
What's the night and the title?
It's February 12th. Starts at 7. Doors open at 6:30 at Annalee High School. There's a flyer on the table back there. But again, yeah, just to echo Dave's point about visiting your Congress people and your representatives, so important. And yeah, so.
Through CCO, we have a program where they remind you once a month, call your rep. And it helps me. It's always on my mind. But I get a call on the 13th of every month saying, call them today.
Yeah.
And that's one of the programs we work with.
I know locally, we've met with our city council, to pass a climate resolution here. I know this has nothing to do with the national bill, but just a point of.
The Sebastopol City Council endorsed our bill. We talked to them, and they said we like it, and they passed it.
There you
4-0.
So, I think I'm going to wrap up, and I appreciate Peter, everybody give him a hand here.